You think you know power? You think a badge and a gun make you a god? Officer Brock Miller thought so. He thought he could pull a woman out of her car in the dead of night, drag her to a holding cell, and humiliate her by shaving her head just for a laugh. He thought she was a nobody. He thought her tears were a sign of weakness. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. The woman trembling in that chair wasn't a criminal. She was the Honorable Justice Roman Vance, the toughest presiding judge in the state. And in less than 48 hours, Miller would be walking into a courtroom, her courtroom, completely unaware that the judge holding his life in her hands is the same woman he just assaulted. Get ready, because the karma coming his way isn't just hard, it's lethal. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of night where the rain doesn't wash the streets clean. It just makes the grime slicker. The city of Chicago felt heavy, pressed down by a low, gray sky. Roman Vance was tired. That was the only reason she had taken the old sedan that night. Usually, she drove her reliable SUV, but it was in the shop, and she had resorted to driving her late father's 1998 Honda Accord. It was a humble car for a woman of her stature, but Roman didn't care about status symbols. She cared about the law. She cared about truth. At 42 years old, Roman was the youngest black woman to be appointed as a presiding judge in the Superior Court's Criminal Division. She was known as the Iron Gavel by defense attorneys and prosecutors alike. She didn't tolerate nonsense. She knew the penal code better than the people who wrote it, and she had zero patience for corruption. But tonight she wasn't Your Honor. She was just Roman, wearing a baggy gray hoodie and sweatpants, driving home from a late-night visit to her sick aunt in the South Side. She had removed her makeup. Her hair, usually styled in an impeccable, professional bun, was loose in thick, beautiful braids that fell past her shoulders. She stopped at a red light on 43rd Street. The intersection was empty, save for a patrol car sitting in the shadows of a closed gas station. Roman checked her rearview mirror. The patrol car's headlights flicked on. "Don't do it," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel. "Don't profile me tonight. I'm too tired." The light turned green. Roman eased on the gas, staying perfectly within the speed limit. 2 blocks later, the red and blue lights exploded in her rearview mirror. She sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion, and pulled over. She rolled down the window, keeping her hands visible at the 10 and 2 position. She knew the drill. She had presided over enough excessive force cases to know that one wrong move could turn a traffic stop into a funeral. 2 officers approached, one on the left, one on the right. The one at her window was a man Roman would later learn was Officer Brock Miller. He was massive, with a neck that seemed to disappear into his shoulders and a jaw set in permanent aggression. His partner, Officer Stan Kowalski, hung back by the rear tire, hand hovering near his holster. "License and registration," Miller barked, shining a blinding tactical flashlight directly into Roman's eyes. "It's in my glove compartment, officer," Roman said, her voice calm, measured. "I'm going to reach over and get it now." "I didn't ask for a narration. Just get it," Miller snapped. Roman moved slowly. She handed over the documents. Miller snatched them, glancing at the name Roman Vance. It meant nothing to him. To him, she was just a black woman in a beat-up car in a bad neighborhood. "Get out of the car," Miller said. Roman frowned. "Officer, may I ask why? I was driving the speed limit. My registration is current." "I smell marijuana," Miller lied. It was smooth, practiced. The universal lie used to bypass the Fourth Amendment. "I don't smoke, officer. There are no drugs in this car. Get out. Now." Miller yanked the door open. Roman knew her rights. She knew she could refuse a search without a warrant unless there was probable cause. But she also knew that Brock Miller wasn't interested in the law. He was interested in dominance. If she said, I am a judge. Right now, he might panic. He might escalate. Or worse, he might cover his tracks immediately. She needed to see how far this would go. She stepped out. Hands on the hood! Miller kicked her legs apart, patting her down aggressively. His hands lingered too long, too rough. He found nothing. No weapon. No drugs. Kowalski, tear the car apart, Miller yelled. For 20 minutes, Roman stood in the rain while they gutted her father's car. They ripped out the lining of the trunk. They dumped her purse onto the wet asphalt. They found nothing. Frustrated that his instincts were wrong, Miller turned his anger toward Roman. He needed a win. He needed an arrest to justify the stop. You resisted, Miller muttered, grabbing her wrist. I did no such thing, Roman stated firmly. Officer, look at your body cam. I have been perfectly compliant. Camera's malfunctioning, sweetheart, Miller grinned, a cold, predatory expression. He twisted her arm behind her back, hard enough to make her shoulder pop. Stop resisting. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting a peace officer. The handcuffs clicked. The cold steel bit into her skin. Roman Vance, the woman who signed warrants for high-profile raids, was shoved into WCU, the back of a squad car like a common criminal. As the door slammed, she looked through the wire mesh at Miller. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just memorized his face. The precinct was chaotic, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Miller and Kowalski paraded Roman in like a trophy. They booked her under the name Jane Doe because Roman refused to speak until she had her lawyer. She refused to give them her biometrics or unlock her phone. She's a mute one, huh? Kowalski laughed, tossing Roman's purse into a plastic bin. Probably hiding a warrant. We'll break her, Miller said. Put her in holding cell 4, the one with no camera. Roman's heart hammered against her ribs. Cell 4, that was where the accidents happened. She sat on the cold metal bench, her hands still cuffed. An hour passed, then the door opened. Miller walked in, holding a pair of electric clippers. He wasn't wearing his body cam anymore. We have a hygiene policy here, Miller said, flicking the switch. The clippers buzzed, an angry mechanical hornet sound. We can't have lice in my jail. And looking at that hair, it looks like a health hazard. Roman stood up. Officer, you cannot do this. This is a violation of my civil rights. I do not have lice. If you touch me, you will be facing assault charges. Who's gonna charge me? You? Miller laughed. You're nobody, just another hood rat with an attitude. He shoved her back down onto the bench. He signaled to Kowalski, who stepped in and grabbed Roman's arms, pinning her against the wall. Hold her still, Stan. Let's clean her up. No, Roman screamed, struggling for the first time. I am a judge. I am Judge Roman Vance. Yeah, and I'm the King of England, Miller spat. He didn't believe her. He didn't want to believe her. The cold metal guards of the clippers touched her forehead. Roman squeezed her eyes shut. She felt the vibration against her skull. Shh. A thick braid fell into her lap, then another. Miller wasn't just cutting her hair, he was hacking at it. He was laughing, making jokes about how she looked like a boy. He shaved uneven patches, leaving the scalp raw and irritated. It was an act of pure domination, designed to strip away her identity, her femininity, and her dignity. Tears leaked from Roman's eyes, hot and salty. She stopped screaming. She went to a place in her mind, a quiet place she used when she had to listen to horrific testimony in court. She dissociated. She let them take the hair. Take it, she thought. Take every strand. Because every strand you cut is another year I will add to your sentence. When they were done, Roman looked like a survivor of a war zone. Her head was patchy, bleeding in small nicks. Her beautiful braids lay in a pile on the dirty concrete floor, mixed with cigarette ash and dust. Miller blew the hair off the clippers. "Much better. Now you look like you belong here." They threw her into a solitary cell and left her in the dark. Roman reached up and touched her bare scalp. She didn't weep. The sadness had evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning rage. A rage so focused it felt like a weapon. She sat in the dark and waited. Morning came, and with it, the shift change. A different sergeant, a man named Henderson, who was by the book, did the rounds. When he saw the woman in cell 4, head shaved, bruised, silent, he frowned. "Who is this?" Henderson asked. "Jane Doe, resisting arrest," the morning guard said. "Miller brought her in." Henderson opened the cell. "Ma'am, you get a phone call. You haven't used it." Roman stood up. She walked to the desk, her posture straight despite the humiliation she wore on her head. She picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. "Marcus," she said when the line connected. "Roman, I've been calling you all night. You missed the morning briefing. Where are you?" Marcus Thorne was the best civil rights attorney in the city and Roman's oldest friend. "I'm at the 12th precinct. I've been arrested." "What? I'm coming down there." "Marcus," Roman stopped him. "Bring a camera and bring the bail money. But do not, I repeat, do not, tell them who I am over the phone." "Roman, what happened?" "Just come." When Marcus arrived, he almost vomited. He saw Roman Vance, one of the most respected legal minds in Illinois, looking like a prisoner of war. He started to scream at the desk sergeant, but Roman grabbed his arm. "Quiet," she hissed. "They shaved your head, Elle. They assaulted you." "I know," she whispered, her eyes hard as flint. "And if you blow my cover now, they get suspended with pay. They get a union rep. They get to hide evidence. I want them to think they got away with it." Marcus looked at her, confused. "What are you planning?" "Miller and Kowalski. I saw their names on the roster on the way out," Roman said. "Check the docket for next week. Tell me if you see their names." Marcus pulled out his tablet, scrolling furiously through the court database. He paused. A slow, terrified smile spread across his face. "You're not going to believe this," Marcus said. "Miller and Kowalski are the primary arresting officers in the State versus Darnell, Washington case. Police brutality and corruption charges. It's a huge case. Internal Affairs has been building it for months." "And who is the presiding judge?" Roman asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus turned the screen to her. "You are." Roman nodded slowly. The universe had aligned. The rotation of judges was random, generated by an algorithm weeks in advance. Miller and Kowalski had assaulted the very woman assigned to decide their fate in a separate corruption trial. "They don't know," Roman said softly. "They booked me as Jane Doe. They released me as Jane Doe. They think they broke a random woman." "Elle, you have to recuse yourself," Marcus said. "It's a conflict of interest. If you judge them, the defense will appeal immediately." "No," Roman said. "The law says I must recuse myself if I have a bias that I cannot set aside. But there is a precedent. If the defendants created the conflict intentionally to force a recusal, they cannot benefit from it. Now, they didn't know it was me, but I can use their ignorance." She looked Marcus in the eye. "I'm not going to file a complaint. Not yet. I'm going to go to work on Monday. I'm going to wear my wig, and I'm going to let them walk into my courtroom thinking they own the place." She touched her shaved head. "They wanted to strip me. Fine, I'm going to strip them of everything." Monday morning at the Cook County Criminal Courthouse was usually a symphony of chaos. Lawyers shouting into phones, families weeping in hallways, bailiffs barking orders. But inside the chambers of presiding Judge Roman Vance, the silence was absolute. Roman stood before a full-length mirror. She was dressed in her black robe, the heavy fabric usually a shield, a symbol of impartial authority. Today, it felt like a costume. She looked at her reflection. Her face was swollen slightly from lack of sleep. Her eyes, usually bright with intellectual vigor, were dark pools of restrained fury. And her head, her beautiful dark skin was exposed, scarred with angry red welts where Miller's clippers had bitten too deep. It was a map of humiliation. On a styrofoam headstand on her desk sat a wig. It was expensive, human hair, styled in a professional bob that closely matched how she used to wear her hair when it wasn't braided. Her bailiff, Loretta, a stout woman who had seen everything in her 30 years at the court, knocked softly and entered. She stopped dead, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw Roman's scalp. "Judge Vance, Roman, oh my God, what happened? Are you sick?" Loretta whispered, rushing forward. Roman held up a hand. Her voice was shards of ice. "I'm not sick, Loretta. I was processed by the 12th Precinct on Tuesday night." Loretta's eyes widened in horror as the implications sunk in. Who did this?" "The defendants in the 9 a.m. motion hearing," Roman said, picking up the wig. She placed it carefully on her head, adjusting it until the scars were hidden. She looked in the mirror. Judge Vance was back. The victim was buried. "Loretta," Roman said, turning to her bailiff. "No one is to know. Not the clerks, not the stenographer. No one. If you breathe a word of this, I will hold you in contempt myself. Do you understand?" Loretta nodded furiously, tears in her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. Those bastards won't know what hit 'em." Roman grabbed her gavel. "Let's go to work." Courtroom 4B was packed. The State versus Washington case involved allegations that officers Brock Miller and Stan Kowalski had been running a protection racket in the South Side, beating and framing anyone who didn't pay up. Darnell Washington, a local business owner, was the victim who finally came forward. The stakes were incredibly high. When the bailiff announced, "All rise, the Honorable Judge Roman Vance presiding," the courtroom shuffled to its feet. Roman walked up the steps to the bench. She felt dizzy for a moment, the trauma of the weekend threatening to buckle her knees. She gripped the mahogany surface until her knuckles turned white, forcing herself to breathe. She sat down. She looked out over the courtroom. She saw the prosecution table, led by District Attorney Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, ambitious woman looking stressed. Then Roman looked at the defense table. There they were. Brock Miller and Stan Kowalski were sitting there, not in prison jumpsuits, but in expensive suits paid for by their police union defense fund. They were out on bail, despite the severity of the charges. They looked relaxed, whispering to their high-priced defense attorney, Robert Sterling, a man known for loud suits and louder objections. Miller was leaning back in his chair, chewing gum, the same jawline, the same dead, arrogant eyes. Roman felt a physical wave of nausea. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The sense memory of his hands on her, the smell of his stale breath, the buzzing of the clippers, it all flooded back. "Breathe, Roman. You are the law here. He is nothing." "Be seated," Roman said. Her voice was steady, amplified by the microphone. It didn't tremble. Miller glanced up at her. His eyes swept over her face, her robe, her hair. There was absolutely no flicker of recognition. None. To Brock Miller, black women were interchangeable. The sobbing mess in the holding cell had nothing in common with this powerful creature sitting high above him. "We are here for pre-trial motions in the matter of State versus Miller and Kowalski," Roman said, opening the file. Robert Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, Robert Sterling for the defense. Before we begin, we have a motion to dismiss based on lack of credible evidence from the prosecution's primary witness, Mr. Washington, given his prior record. It was a standard slimy defense tactic, attack the victim's character. Mr. Sterling, Roman cut in, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Washington's prior record for minor offenses a decade ago has zero bearing on whether your clients assaulted him last month. The motion is denied. Save the theatrics for the jury. Sterling looked surprised by the immediate shutdown. Miller scowled, leaning forward to whisper angrily to his lawyer. Roman watched them. She watched Miller's aggression bubble just beneath the surface. She knew exactly what that aggression felt like. Throughout the hour-long hearing, Roman ruled down the middle on procedural matters. She granted the defense some minor discovery requests, denied others. She had to be perfect. If she showed even a hint of bias now, they could get the case thrown out later on appeal. She was playing a dangerous game. Every time Miller looked at her, she wanted to scream. She wanted to order the bailiffs to drag him into the holding cell and shave his head bald. But she swallowed the rage. She let it fuel her focus. The hearing ended. As the courtroom cleared, Roman watched Miller walk out. He was laughing at something Sterling said, clapping Kowalski on the back. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was walking out of his courtroom. Roman watched him go, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the synthetic hair of her wig. "Enjoy your laugh, Officer Miller," she thought. "It will be your last." The trial began 3 days later. The tension in Chicago was palpable. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, demanding justice for Darnell Washington and an end to police corruption. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was thick. The prosecution rested their case on Thursday afternoon. It had been a solid, if not slam-dunk, presentation. Darnell Washington's testimony was powerful, but Sterling had hammered him on cross-examination, trying to make him look like a gang-affiliated liar who hated cops. On Friday morning, the defense began their case. Their strategy was bold and stupid. They put Brock Miller on the stand. Sterling wanted to present Miller as a decorated hero, a tough cop doing a tough job in a dangerous neighborhood, unfairly targeted by criminals making up stories. Miller sat in the witness box, wearing his dress blues, medals gleaming on his chest. He looked the part of the American hero. He answered Sterling's softball questions with practiced politeness. Yes, he used force sometimes, but only when necessary. No, he never took money. He was just trying to clean up the streets. Then it was DA Sarah Jenkins's turn for cross-examination. She went on the attack, questioning him about specific inconsistencies in his police reports regarding the Washington arrest. Miller started to get agitated. His polite facade began to crack. He leaned forward, his voice getting louder. "You don't understand what it's like out there, Ms. Jenkins," Miller sneered. "It's a war zone. We don't have the time to be polite when we're dealing with animals." The word hung in the air. Animals. Roman stiffened on the bench. She remembered him calling her a hood rat. "Animals, Officer Miller," Jenkins pressed. "Is that how you view the citizens of the South Side?" "Objection! Argumentative!" Sterling yelled, jumping up. "Overruled," Roman said, her voice tight. "The witness will answer the question." Miller glared at Jenkins, then flicked his eyes up to the judge. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. A sense of déjà vu. Unlikely. He just saw a black female judge siding with a female prosecutor. "I view criminals as criminals," Miller snarled. "And sometimes you gotta speak their language so they understand who's in charge." Jenkins paused, looking for an opening. "Officer Miller, part of the allegations against you involve a pattern of humiliation tactics used against detainees. Specifically, the unnecessary destruction of property and personal appearance to exert dominance." Sterling was on his feet again. Objection! This is irrelevant to the Washington case. There is no evidence of that here. Roman leaned forward. This was it. The door was opened. Mr. Sterling, the prosecution is establishing a pattern of behavior. Overruled. Continue, Miss Jenkins. Jenkins continued. Have you ever, for example, detained someone without cause, refused them a phone call, and then altered their appearance just to humiliate them? Miller laughed. It was a genuine, arrogant scoff. That's ridiculous. We have standard operating procedures for hygiene in the holding cells, sure. If someone comes in covered in lice or filth, yeah, we clean them up. It's for safety. Roman felt the scar on her scalp throb. Lice. The same lie he told her. So you only do it for hygiene? Jenkins asked. Never for punishment? Never for fun? Never, Miller said, looking directly at the jury, putting on his best honest face. I am a professional. I follow the book. Roman couldn't breathe. The lie was so massive, so disgusting in its casual delivery, that it sucked the air out of the room. She looked at the jury. They seemed to believe him. He was charming them. He was going to get away with it. Again. If she stayed silent, she was complicit. The law required impartiality, yes, but the law also required truth. And what was happening in her courtroom was a perversion of the truth. Roman made a decision. It was professional suicide. It was unprecedented. But it was necessary. Wait a moment, Miss Jenkins, Roman interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a clarion call. Everyone stopped. It was highly unusual for a judge to interrupt a cross-examination so abruptly. Roman turned her chair slightly, so she was facing Brock Miller directly. She looked deep into his eyes. Officer Miller, Roman said, her voice deceptively calm. You just stated under oath that you only alter a detainee's appearance for legitimate hygiene reasons, and that you follow the book. Is that your testimony? Miller looked confused by the direct intervention. Yes, Your Honor, that is the truth. You are quite certain? Roman pressed. Yes, absolutely. Roman nodded slowly. The court cannot accept that statement as truth. Sterling leaped up, knocking his chair over. Your Honor, what are you doing? You cannot comment on the credibility of a witness in front of the jury. I move for an immediate mistrial. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Roman's voice boomed, startling everyone. She slammed the gavel down with such force it chipped the wood. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The courtroom froze. Sterling froze, mid-objection. Roman kept her eyes locked on Miller. The arrogance was starting to drain from his face, replaced by confusion and a dawning sense of dread. He realized suddenly that the judge was looking at him with hatred. Pure, unadulterated hatred. You lied to this court, Mr. Miller, Roman said. And I know you lied, because you didn't do it to animals. You didn't do it to a criminal. Roman raised both hands to her head. The courtroom watched, mesmerized, confused. Slowly, deliberately, Roman gripped the sides of her expensive wig. She lifted it straight up. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It started in the jury box, spread to the gallery, and ended with a choked sound from the DA. Underneath the wig, Roman's head was a landscape of trauma. The crude, patchy shave job was visible to everyone. The red, inflamed nicks and cuts from Miller's brutal handling stood out against her dark skin. It was shocking. It was violent. It was undeniable proof of an assault. Roman placed the wig on the bench next to her gavel. She sat there, exposed, wearing her humiliation like a crown of thorns. She looked down at Miller. For the first time in his life, Brock Miller looked truly terrified. His eyes bulged from his head. His jaw dropped open. He looked from the bald woman on the bench to the memory of the woman in the cell. The connection slammed into him like a freight train. The nobody, the hood rat. It was her. "You did it to me," Roman said, her voice shaking with emotion but vibrating with power. "Last Tuesday night, Precinct 12, Cell 4, you and Officer Kowalski." Pandemonium broke loose. The silence that followed Judge Roman Vance's revelation was not merely the absence of noise, it was a physical weight. It pressed against the eardrums of every person in courtroom 4B, heavy and suffocating. For 5 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The jury stared, mouths agape, at the woman on the bench. The district attorney, Sarah Jenkins, had her hand clamped over her mouth. The court reporter's fingers hovered, trembling over the stenotype machine, unsure how to transcribe the visual of a presiding judge revealing the brutal evidence of an assault on her own body. On the bench, the wig sat next to the gavel, a sleek, synthetic lie resting beside the instrument of truth. And Roman sat exposed. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom were unforgiving. They highlighted every ridge of the patchy, uneven shave job. They illuminated the angry red razor burn at her temples and the small, scabbing nick just above her left ear, where Miller's hand had slipped in his haste to humiliate her. She didn't lower her head. She didn't flinch. She sat with the regal bearing of a queen who had just laid her sword on the table. Then, the dam broke. A collective, strangled gasp ripped through the gallery, followed instantly by a cacophony of chaos. Reporters in the back rows were scrambling over each other, shouting into phones, ignoring the bailiff's commands to stay seated. The jury box dissolved into frantic whispering, jurors pointing from the judge to the defendant with looks of horrified realization. But the center of the storm was the witness stand. Brock Miller was frozen. His brain, usually quick to find an excuse or a loophole, had ground to a halt. He looked at the bald woman on the bench. He looked at the memory of the trembling woman in the holding cell. He tried to force them apart, to keep them in separate boxes. One a powerful authority figure, the other a nobody he could crush. But the boxes smashed together. The hood rat was the judge. The victim was the executioner. His face drained of color so fast it looked as if he had been hooked up to a pump. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. "Oh my God," he finally wheezed, the microphone picking up the whisper and amplifying it like a thunderclap. Robert Sterling, the defense attorney, was the first to snap out of the trance. He knocked his chair over as he scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with panic. "Objection! Your Honor! This is highly irregular. You must recuse yourself immediately. You are introducing prejudicial evidence. This is a mistrial." Roman didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply picked up her gavel and brought it down. Bang! The sound was singular and violent. It cut through the noise like a knife. "Bailiffs," Roman said, her voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a cold, terrifying authority. "Secure this courtroom. If anyone speaks out of turn again, they will join the defendants in the holding cell." Loretta and 4 other deputies moved with military precision, forming a wall between the gallery and the well of the court. The room fell silent again, but the tension was electric. Roman turned her gaze, slowly to Robert Sterling. The lawyer shrank back, actually taking a half step away from the bench. "You are calling for a mistrial, Mr. Sterling?" Roman asked, her voice deceptively calm. Yes, Your Honor," Sterling stammered, sweating visibly. You are clearly the victim of the alleged assault described by the prosecution. You cannot preside over this case. This is a conflict of interest of the highest order." "You are correct," Roman said. "I cannot preside over the Washington case. But you are forgetting something, Counselor." She shifted her eyes to Brock Miller. The look she gave him was devoid of mercy. It was the look of a predator who had just trapped its prey. The conflict of interest exists for the crimes committed outside this courtroom, Roman stated clearly. But right now, we are dealing with a crime committed inside this courtroom, in front of the jury, in front of the clerks, in front of me. She leaned forward, pointing a long, steady finger at Miller. Officer Brock Miller, you just testified under oath that you have never used hygiene procedures as a punishment. You testified that you follow the book. You testified that you are a professional. Miller griped the sides of the witness stand, his knuckles white. I didn't know. You didn't know who I was, Roman corrected him, her voice rising. But you knew what you did. You knew you lied. That is perjury, Mr. Miller. That is a felony committed in the face of the court. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record reflect that the presiding judge has identified the defendant, Brock Miller, as the individual who assaulted her and unlawfully restrained her at the 12th Precinct on the night of November 14th. Let the record reflect that the defendant's testimony regarding his conduct is demonstrably false based on the physical evidence currently displayed on the bench. Roman touched her scalp. The gesture was powerful, intimate, and heartbreaking. You wanted to strip me of my dignity, she said to Miller, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. You wanted to make me look like a criminal so you could feel big. You thought that by taking my hair, you were taking my power. She stood up. She seemed 10 feet tall. But you forgot one thing, officer. The law does not reside in a hairstyle. It resides in the truth, and the truth has just caught up with you. Miller looked at his partner, Kowalski. Kowalski was slumped at the defense table, head in his hands, weeping. He knew it was over. He knew they were buried. Deputies, Roman commanded, take the defendants into custody. Sterling shrieked, On what grounds? You haven't even charged them. On the grounds of perjury, direct contempt of court, and aggravated assault on a judicial officer, Roman fired back. These are new charges, Mr. Sterling. Charges that originated the moment your client decided to lie to my face. I demand bail, Sterling shouted, desperate to regain control. My clients are decorated officers. They are not flight risks. Roman laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Decorated officers? No, they are criminals hiding behind badges. And as for flight risk, Mr. Miller just realized that the woman he assaulted is the woman signing his arrest warrant. I would say the flight risk is astronomical. She looked at the two deputies standing behind Miller. Get him out of my sight. Remand them to the custody of the Cook County Sheriff. No bail. No bail! Miller screamed, finally snapping. He jumped up, knocking the microphone stand over. You can't do this. This is a setup. She trapped me. She didn't tell me who she was. I told you, Roman yelled back, her composure cracking just enough to let the fire out. I told you 3 times. I told you I was a judge. And you laughed. You said, and I'm the King of England. Miller flinched as if she had hit him. Well, Mr. Miller, Roman said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. I don't see a crown on your head, but you certainly see the consequences on mine. The deputies grabbed Miller. He struggled, thrashing against them. Get your hands off me. I'm a cop. I'm a cop, Miller bellowed, his voice cracking with hysteria. Not anymore, Loretta, the bailiff snarled as she twisted Miller's arm behind his back and slammed the handcuffs onto his wrists. The distinct click-click-click of the cuffs echoed through the room, the same sound Roman had heard that rainy Tuesday night. Kowalski didn't fight. He stood up meekly, holding his hands out to be cuffed, tears streaming down his face. The courtroom erupted again. The jury was standing up to get a better view. The sketch artist was furiously drawing the scene of the bald judge condemning the weeping officer. Sterling stood amidst the wreckage of his case, looking defeated. Your Honor, the Washington trial is a mistrial, Roman declared, picking up the wig and placing it gently back onto the foam headstand on her desk. "I am recusing myself effectively immediately. A new judge will be assigned to the Washington matter. But the charges of perjury and assault on a judge, those will stick, and I will be the star witness." She looked down at Miller one last time as the deputies dragged him toward the side door. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who knows he is going to the very place he has sent hundreds of others. He locked eyes with Roman. He pleaded with his eyes. "Please, mercy." Roman held his gaze. She touched the scars on her head. "No. Court is adjourned," Roman said. She slammed the gavel down one last time. It sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. As the heavy door to the holding cell slammed shut behind Miller and Kowalski, swallowing their protests, Roman Vance remained standing. She took a deep breath, inhaling the air of her courtroom. It didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled like justice. She looked at Loretta, whose eyes were shining with tears and fierce pride. Roman gave a small, exhausted nod. The secret was out. The masquerade was over. And the war had just begun. The weeks following the haircut heard round the world were not just a news cycle. They were a cultural earthquake that shook Chicago to its bedrock. The image of Judge Roman Vance, dignified, fierce, and completely bald, seated on her bench, became more than a viral sensation. It became an icon. Murals of her profile appeared on brick walls in the South Side. Women, particularly black women who had been harassed by law enforcement, began showing up to the courthouse wearing "I Stand with Roman" t-shirts. But inside the grim concrete belly of the Cook County Jail, the atmosphere was very different. Brock Miller was no longer Officer Miller. He was inmate Jugger 8940. Because of his status as a former cop, he was held in protective custody, PC, a segregated wing often called the Hole by the general population. But protection was a relative term. The guards here were corrections officers, a different breed than street cops. Many of them were black or Hispanic, and they had seen the video. They knew what Miller had done. His food trays arrived cold. His mail accidentally got lost. And every night, through the ventilation shafts, he could hear the chants from the general population blocks. "Miller, Miller." Fresh meat. He was losing his mind. But he still had one hope, his trial. He convinced himself that a jury would still see a decorated officer, not a criminal. He convinced himself that his high-priced lawyer could spin this. He was wrong. The betrayal, the trial for the people versus Brock Miller and Stanley Kowalski began 4 months later, in the dead of winter. The courthouse was a fortress, surrounded by media vans and barricades. The first twist came before the opening statements. Roman sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Marcus Thorne. She wasn't wearing a wig. She wore her healing scalp like a badge of honor, her remaining hair kept in a short, neat buzz cut. She watched as the bailiffs led the defendants in. Miller looked gaunt, his skin pasty from months without sunlight. He scanned the room, his eyes darting nervously. But when he looked at the defense table, he froze. There was only one chair next to his defense attorney. Stanley Kowalski was missing. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison, a man with a face like carved granite and a reputation for handing out sentences that made grown men weep, took the bench. "Docket number 4599, Judge Harrison intoned. "Where is Mr. Kowalski?" The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed pit bull of a man named Thomas Wright, stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Kowalski has entered a plea agreement. He has pled guilty to all charges and has agreed to testify as a witness for the state against Mr. Miller." Miller audibly gasped. He whipped his head around to look at his lawyer, Victor Hale. "What? He can't do that. We're partners." "Sit down, Miller," Hale hissed, grabbing his arm. The courtroom buzzed with electricity. The blue wall of silence, that unwritten code where cops protect cops, had shattered. Kowalski had chosen self-preservation over loyalty. When Kowalski took the stand later that afternoon, he didn't look at Miller. He looked at his hands. "Tell the jury what happened inside that cell," Wright asked. Kowalski's voice was barely a whisper. "Miller." He was angry. He was mad that the search came up empty. He said he wanted to break her. He said she needed to learn her place. "Did Judge Vance resist?" "No, sir. She was crying. She told us who she was. She said, 'I am a judge.'" Miller just laughed. He said, "If you're a judge, I'm the Pope." "And the haircut?" Kowalski swallowed hard. "It wasn't for hygiene. That was a lie we made up for the report. He did it to humiliate her. He enjoyed it. He took pictures on his personal phone to send to his buddies." Miller slammed his fist on the table, screaming, "You liar! You were holding her down! You laughed too, you traitor!" "Order! Mr. Miller, one more outburst, and you will be bound and gagged," Judge Harrison roared. Miller slumped back, breathing heavily. He looked at the jury. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at him with a mixture of disgust and cold judgment. He felt the floor dropping out from under him. The victim's voice. The trial moved with the speed of a falling guillotine. The video footage was played. The clippers were entered into evidence. But the most devastating moment came when Roman Vance took the stand. She didn't need notes. She didn't need water. She sat in the witness box, the same place where Miller had lied to her face months ago, and she commanded the room. "Can you describe the impact this event had on you?" the prosecutor asked. Roman looked directly at Miller. She forced him to meet her gaze. "I have spent 20 years studying the law," Roman began, her voice resonating in the silent courtroom. "I believed that the law was a shield. But that night, I learned that for men like Brock Miller, the badge is not a shield for the public. It is a sword for themselves." She touched her head. "He didn't just cut my hair. He invaded my bodily autonomy. He stripped me of my identity. For months, I couldn't look in a mirror without shaking. I couldn't drive my car at night without panic attacks. But the worst part," Roman paused, leaning forward, "is knowing that if I were not a judge, if I were the cashier at that gas station or a nurse coming home from a shift, he would have gotten away with it. He has done this before, and he would have done it again." She let that sink in. "He tried to make me feel small," Roman concluded, "but all he did was show the world how small he is." The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. It was a massacre. "We find the defendant, Brock Miller, guilty on all counts: aggravated battery, unlawful restraint, perjury, official misconduct, and hate crime enhancements." Miller didn't react. He was catatonic. The reality was crashing down on him. Not just the prison time, but the loss of his pension, his status, his life. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. The sentencing. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. People were standing in the aisles. Outside, a crowd of thousands chanted, "Justice for Vance." Judge Harrison did not waste time. He shuffled his papers and looked over his spectacles at Miller, who was now wearing the orange jumpsuit of a convicted felon. "Mr. Miller," Judge Harrison said, his voice deceptively soft, "throughout this trial, I have watched you. I have looked for a shred of remorse. I have looked for a hint that you understand the gravity of your actions. I found none. You are not sorry you hurt a woman. You are sorry you hurt a judge." Harrison leaned forward. "You have disgraced your uniform. You have terrorized the community you swore to protect, and you attempted to corrupt the judicial system itself with your arrogance. For the charge of perjury, I sentence you to 5 years." Miller blinked. 5 years. He could do 5 years. For the charge of unlawful restraint, I sentence you to 7 years. For the charge of official misconduct, 5 years. And for the charge of aggravated battery with hate crime enhancements. Judge Harrison paused. The room held its breath. I sentence you to 23 years. Miller's head snapped up. These sentences are to run consecutively. Judge Harrison slammed the gavel. That is a total of 40 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will not be eligible for parole until you are 75 years old. Take him away. 40 years. Miller's knees buckled. He actually collapsed, his legs turning to jelly. 2 large bailiffs had to haul him up by his armpits. As they dragged him backward toward the holding cell, he looked out at the gallery. He saw Roman Vance. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't cheering. She was simply watching him, her face a mask of stone. She gave him a single slow nod, a final acknowledgement of the balance being restored. No, Miller screamed as the door opened. I'm a cop. You can't put me in general. They'll kill me. I'm a cop. The door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The hard karma. The transfer happened at 3 a.m. to avoid the press, but the inmates at Stateville Correctional Center knew he was coming. In prison, news travels faster than light. Stateville was a maximum security fortress, a gothic nightmare of steel and stone. It smelled of bleach, unwashed bodies, and fear. Miller was processed in silence. The guards here didn't treat him like a brother. To them, he was a headache. A dirty cop who made their jobs harder. They stripped him, searched him, and handed him his whites. Protective custody is full up in Block B, the intake sergeant said, chewing on a toothpick. We're putting you in the transition wing until a cell opens up. Keep your head down, Miller. Miller was marched through the corridors. The noise was deafening. It was a cacophony of shouting, metal banging on metal, and laughter. As he walked past the cells, faces pressed against the bars. Hey, Officer Miller! I remember you. You broke my brother's arm. Fresh haircut, Miller. He kept his eyes on the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was hell. This was actually hell. They stopped at a cell at the end of the tier. The guard unlocked it. Get in. Miller stepped inside. It was 6 feet by 8 feet. A toilet, a bunk, a sink. There was already someone in the bottom bunk. A massive man, tattoos covering his neck and arms, reading a paperback book. He looked up as Miller entered. The man's eyes widened, and then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well, 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 the inmate said, closing his book. If it isn't the barber. Miller backed up against the bars. Stay back. I'm PC. I'm not supposed to be in with anyone. Guard, Miller yelled, turning around. You made a mistake. I need a single cell. The guard was already walking away. Paperwork says double bunk, Miller. Deal with it. Miller turned back to his cellmate. The man stood up. He was a head taller than Miller. You don't remember me, do you? The man asked, stepping closer. Miller shook his head, trembling. My name is Marcus King, the man said. 3 years ago, you pulled me over. You said I looked like a suspect. You planted an ounce of coke in my trunk. Cost me my job. Cost me my marriage. I'm doing 5 years because of you. Miller's blood turned to ice. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The universe hadn't just punished him. It had delivered him directly into the hands of his own sins. I didn't, Miller stammered. Marcus King reached under his mattress and pulled out a small, crude object. It was a plastic razor, the safety guard removed, modified into a shank. Relax, officer, King said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. I ain't gonna stick you, not yet. King pointed to the metal stool in the center of the cell. Sit down. What? I said sit down, King barked. It's hygiene time. We have a strict policy in here. We can't have lice. Miller began to weep. Genuine ugly sobs. He slumped onto the stool, burying his face in his hands. Please, Miller begged. Please don't. Shut up, King said, standing behind him. He placed a heavy hand on Miller's head, gripping the short military cut Miller was so proud of. You liked playing barber, right? You liked taking things from people? King brought the razor down to Miller's scalp. It wasn't electric. It was dull, cheap plastic. It scraped against the skin, painful and slow. Now you're gonna learn, King whispered into his ear. You ain't the judge anymore. You ain't the law. You're just another nobody in a cage. Miller squeezed his eyes shut as the first scrape of the razor tore across his scalp. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the prison block, hundreds of men cheering, banging their cups against the bars, welcoming Officer Brock Miller to his new life. Outside in the free world, Roman Vance slept soundly for the first time in months. But in cell 309, the long, dark night was just beginning. It took 40 years of a prison sentence to balance the scales, but Brock Miller finally learned the one lesson he refused to understand. Dignity is not something you can cut away with a pair of clippers. He tried to break a queen, but he only ended up locking himself in a dungeon with his own demons. This story is a reminder that power doesn't come from a badge or a uniform. It comes from integrity. And when you abuse your power to hurt the vulnerable, you better pray the nobody you torment isn't the judge who holds your future in her hands. If this story of absolute justice gave you chills, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who needs to see karma in action. And make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell turned on, so you're the first to know when the next story drops. Stay safe, stay kind, and always stand your ground. Thanks for watching.